Done. All right, let's talk about it. Hey makers, Trevor here for Love Make Share, back in the shop with a recently finished project. Did myself a little spaceship diorama, and there's a couple things that I want to talk about in this. First is using up scraps. Second is turning a mistake into something that works for you. And third is visual storytelling. Notice that I have a friend now in the corner of the screen here. I can't keep him off the workbench right now, so he's just going to be there. So let's talk about what this is. This is a little runabout from Star Trek, either Deep Space Nine or The Next Generation. And what's going on here is that I've got it crash landed on a little planet with kind of a sulfur theme. Think Yellowstone mineral pools. Basically, the genesis of this is that I was 3D printing a new model using software I wasn't super familiar with, and it didn't turn out quite the way I wanted. Not only that, but while removing support material for the bottom, I actually broke one nacelle completely off. So instead of throwing the whole thing out, what I decided to do was take some of the support material and the broken model and just really go to town on it with some pliers and see if I could make this look like a half-decent crash. Now, having a damaged ship is one thing, but having it crashed somewhere interesting is much, much better. So what I ended up doing was cutting just a small circle of plywood out and going at it with some plaster of Paris for the kind of almost liquid flowy bits, but also for the rocks. So I sculpted that in with basically with an X-Acto knife and my fingers. So thus far, failed 3D print, bit of scrap plywood, little bit of plaster of Paris left over from another project. Next came the paint job, and the paint job is really what differentiates this from a bunch of scraps haphazardly thrown together and something that actually kind of tells a story and is interesting to look at. Now, if you've ever watched Star Trek, you can probably tell that most of the time they're just beaming down to a hastily constructed set on a backlot. It's the same oval of gravel with styrofoam boulders pretty much week to week. But I thought that this demanded something a little bit more interesting, something a little bit more exotic. As I was in the process of putting this together, somebody online, I posted a picture of the crashed runabout, and I asked what kind of terrain it should be on. I can't remember if somebody specifically suggested sulfur or if somebody suggested something along the lines of the Yellowstone mineral pools. Either way, it got to the same place, which is this very colorful sulfur planet, mineral deposit, mineral flow kind of setting. And this is where the visual storytelling starts to come into it and where the paints come into it. I should also mention that we don't use expensive materials for any of the builds that we do on Love Make Share. Generally speaking, we try to avoid buying specialized materials or specialized tools. Because we're kind of generalists, because we are interested in doing kind of whatever we want to do, we want multi-purpose tools and materials as much as possible. So all of the painting that we did here is more or less just craft acrylics between $1.50 and $2.50 at Michael's or the dollar store or Walmart or wherever it is you go to get your general crafty stuff. And the trick that I have found is patience. The thing that works well for me is just straight up patience and layering. The paint job started by sealing the plaster with a matte clear coat and then using a medium gray to paint in the rocks. I figure I could darken it with washes and shadowing and then brighten it with highlighting. The defining point of the geography was the pools themselves, so I started laying those in to try and get a sense of where everything was going to go. Then came a yellow base coat. I added some more of the little pools and then started adding in highlights. At this point, I needed additional texture on the base to match what I'd seen in the mineral pool. So using some Mod Podge and craft sand, I applied additional texture to those areas. At this point, I'm attempting to bring in a little bit more definition using shadowing. This is just a quick and dirty kind of sloppy darkening of all the different areas. Now dry brushing to lighten up the exposed areas all over the model. The mineral pools have a gradation of orange to a red orange where the minerals are being deposited, so I try to duplicate that as much as possible on the model. More clear coat to seal everything. At this point, the rocks were far too gray and didn't necessarily blend with the rest of the environment, so I did a wash to warm everything up. I also decided I needed some additional texture, so using cork and some more of the craft sand, I went in and added additional texturing. Those areas of additional texture, according to the reference photos, should have been much lighter, so I painted them with a pale yellow and then added some washes to start to blend them back in with the rest of the surface. Of course, all of the washes darkened down and dulled the bright mineral flows, so I went back in and attempted to brighten those back up. A quick coat of black around the base really brought everything together. And finally, pouring in some liquid glass in thin layers gave it the wet, watery finish I was looking for. The other thing that really helped here, and the thing that I say a lot to writers who are struggling to come up with ideas, is good input makes good output. For this, I did a little bit of research. I looked at sulfur pools, I looked at mineral pools, I looked at Yellowstone, and I tried to replicate some of the patterns that I saw there. Not directly, because with this, clearly this mineral flow has been going on long enough that it has actually built up a pretty significant layer of this kind of sulfuric deposit over all of the terrain. It's actually subsuming the rest of the rocks in this mineral flow. The wetter areas tended to be brighter and the drier areas tended to be a little bit more weathered. So I have these rich reddish oranges in the areas of fresh flow, and then I have this kind of dusty, dirty, grayish yellow in the higher areas that are much older. I did a little bit of extra weathering in the areas around the shuttle to kind of indicate that maybe there was some extra bleed, some extra damage, maybe some fluids that have leaked out over time. I did use 3 products on this that are neither craft acrylics nor just stuff I had lying around. One of those products was just this matte clear coat, which I found really useful. After doing a few layers, I could seal what I had done and then continue painting, continue layering on without damaging or disturbing the layers underneath. So I did a couple of passes once I had some texture that I liked and some depth of color and detail that I liked, just in order to seal it all in. Another product that I found that I really liked was this Tri-Art liquid glass. It's just a pouring medium. It's meant to be high gloss, but what it did really nicely after I built up a few layers was it makes it look really wet and glossy. When you get up close on the model, it really does look like there's been water trickling out for a good long time. The one thing is that it doesn't dry quite clear if you put in too much, so it really does have to be built up in layers. The final thing I used in order to finish this was some brown shoe polish. This I use almost exclusively on the runabout itself. So I'll tell you something about this type of applicator. It actually has a little rubber brush inside it. And I found out the hard way on a previous project that if you actually dab the applicator directly onto whatever it is you're working on, you're going to actually put tiny little puncture marks in the object. I just dabbed it out on some newspaper and then took an older brush, slopped it on pretty thickly, let it dry for 15-20 seconds, and then took a paper towel to wipe it off. And again, this is a process of layering, layering, layering. The ship, like the rest of the environment, just needed enough layers of paint and wear on it to start looking like part of the environment. That was the real breaking point in terms of making this look like a cohesive diorama rather than a model glued to a base. I have the advantage of having an actual changing environment, if you will, in the diorama. Because I chose something that, by definition, changes over time, I could add some of those changes to the runabout. So at the back, I actually have it so that it looks almost like the water has gushed up and has wet some parts of the runabout, and we've got some of that newer sulfur deposit, and then along the nacelles and along here we've got some of the lighter sulfur deposits. So that just really brings the whole model together. It makes this look like it's part of the environment. I posted this in a couple of modeling groups on Facebook recently, and people commented like, wow, that runabout has been there for a long time. Yes, it has. This is because the 3D print was bad. It was a bad quality print, and I actually lost most of the detail in the model. So going in and doing extra weathering to make it look like, yes, it actually has been here for a really long time, it really, really helped me sell the model and hide some of the flaws inherent to the print itself. That's about it, and I really, really enjoyed this process. I think I'm gonna do more of these. I love the idea of visual storytelling, of using cues in what you've done to really explain what is happening visually. So there's an entire story here, and it invites other storytelling. When I posted the photo, other people were suggesting stories as to what might happen, or to what might have happened to this unfortunate shuttle. I really liked seeing what this inspired in other people, because they were picking up on the cues that I was putting into the work. I clearly succeeded in suggesting enough that other people could pick it up and run with it. And that's really the fun thing about making stuff like this and sharing it, is seeing what other people think of it. Not just what they think of it, but what it makes them think. If you're gonna take anything away from this, I want you to take away the idea that I am a bad painter, but I'm a patient one. I just continue to do it until it looks right. This has been on my workbench for a while, and I went back to the finished piece a couple of times, including twice last week, in order to get it to a point where I was like, yes, this conceivably is finished now. And it really just is about layering, and about figuring out the idea that you want to convey, and continuing to layer stuff in until it actually sells that idea. The other thing is, you don't need fancy airbrush setups, you don't need really high quality paints, you can just kind of do it on the cheap. This is a couple of bucks worth of materials, realistically, but hours of zen and enjoyment for me, and quite a bit of satisfaction with the finished product. So anyway, that's it for me. If you do any dioramas, I would love for you to link to them in the comments below. I would love to see the stories that you're telling on a small scale like this. Until next time, thank you so much for watching. I'm Trevor, this is Love Make Share. Now, go make something.